The 1960s gave us some of the greatest music ever recorded. But let's be honest, not every tune from that decade struck gold. Some songs were loved by a few and absolutely despised by many. From novelty tracks that wore out their welcome to experiments gone wrong, and even a few big names who stumbled in surprising ways. So join us as we count down the top 13 most disliked songs of the 1960s. Stay tuned for the hidden bonus track at the end. Number 13, Obla Dee, Obla Dee by the Beatles, 1968. Even the mighty Beatles weren't immune to making a song that split listeners right down the middle. Obla Dee was Paul McCartney's attempt at a jaunty reggae-inspired pop tune. The title came from a Jamaican friend who often used the phrase, and Paul thought it would be the perfect hook. But inside the studio, the mood was far less cheerful. John Lennon dismissed it as granny music and grew furious with the endless takes Paul demanded. George Harrison and Ringo Starr weren't exactly thrilled either. The tension was so thick, Lennon once stormed out before begrudgingly returning to pound out the piano part that ended up on the record. Despite the drama, it landed on the White Album and even reached #1 in some countries. Still, many critics and fans found it unbearably chirpy, a nursery rhyme dressed up as rock. To this day, it remains one of the Beatles' most famously disliked tracks. Number 12, Honey by Bobby Goldsboro, 1968.
See the tree, how big it's grown, but friend, it hasn't been too long.
Few songs in pop history have divided listeners quite like Bobby Goldsboro's Honey. Released in 1968, it became a massive hit, topping the Billboard Hot 100 for 5 weeks. Yet it's also remembered as one of the most heavily criticized ballads of the decade.
I laughed at her and she got mad the first day that she planted it.
The song tells the story of a man grieving the loss of his young wife. Written by songwriter Bobby Russell, it was intended as a tender, emotional ballad. But for many, the syrupy delivery and overly sentimental lyrics crossed into the territory of pure melodrama. Critics called it mawkish, manipulative, even unbearable. Still, audiences at the time disagree. Honey sold over 1 million copies and struck a chord with listeners who embraced its raw sadness.
Then the first snow came and she ran out to brush the snow away.
Today, it's often listed among the worst songs of all time. And yet, for those who were touched by it in 1968, Honey remains a bittersweet reminder of how powerfully music can polarize. Number 11, MacArthur Park by Richard Harris, 1968.
Spring was never waiting for us, girl.
You either swoon or cringe. Richard Harris wasn't even a singer, he was an actor. Yet in 1968, he delivered one of the most over-the-top ballads of the decade.
It ran one step ahead as we followed in the dance.
MacArthur Park is nearly 7 minutes long. It builds like an opera, strings swelling, Harris practically shouting the lyrics. And then, that infamous line, "Someone left the cake out in the rain." For some listeners, it was poetic. For everyone else, it was unintentionally hilarious.
Someone left the cake out in the rain.
Despite the ridicule, the song soared to #2 on the Billboard Hot 100. It even won composer Jimmy Webb a Grammy. But ever since, it's been a favorite punching bag in worst song ever polls.
Love's hot fevered iron, like a striped pair of pants.
Still, love it or not, there's something mesmerizing about its sheer drama. Too much frosting? Maybe. But half a century later, people are still talking about that soggy cake in the park. Number 10, I'm Henry VIII, I Am, by Herman's Hermits, 1965. The British invasion brought countless classics across the Atlantic, and then there was this one, I'm Henry VIII, I Am. Wasn't a brand new song at all. It was a music hall novelty tune from 1910, dusted off by Herman's Hermits and turned into a rock and roll sing-along.
I'm Henry VIII, I am, Henry VIII, I am, I am.
Clocking in at just over 1.5 minutes. The track barrels forward with shouted vocals and almost no melody. Lead singer Peter Noone leaned into the silliness, chanting about being the 8th husband of a widow named Henry. Listeners either chuckled or groaned. Critics accused it of being lazy, repetitive, and downright annoying, and yet the joke was on them. In 1965, it shot all the way to #1 on the US charts.
I got married to the widow next door. She's been married 7 times before.
For many fans, though, it felt like a throwaway. Proof that even during the golden age of rock, a silly novelty could beat out more deserving song. Number 9. Hanky Panky by Tommy James and the Shondells, 1966.
My baby does the hanky panky.
Some hits are carefully crafted masterpieces. Others stumble into success almost by accident. Hanky Panky was the latter, and it became one of the most ridiculed number 1 singles of the 1960s. Originally written as a quick throwaway by Jeff Barry and Ellie Greenwich, the song barely had any lyrics, just a handful of lines repeated endlessly. Tommy James first recorded it with a local band in 1964, and the single went nowhere. But 2 years later, a bootleg copy found its way onto Pittsburgh radio. Demand exploded, and James scrambled to form a new version of the Shondells to capitalize on the momentum. Critics, however, weren't impressed. Many dismissed it as mindless, repetitive, and lyrically empty. Still, audiences pushed it to number 1 in 1966. Hanky Panky may not have much substance, but it proves that sometimes pure energy and a little luck can be enough to top the charts. Number 8. Mr. Custer by Larry Verne, 1960. The 1960s began with one of the unlikeliest number 1 hits in pop history, and one of the most disliked. Custer by Larry Verne was a novelty record that topped the charts in 1960, but today it's remembered more for groans than giggles.
That famous day in history, the men of the 7th Cavalry went riding on.
The song is sung from the perspective of a reluctant soldier in General Custer's army, begging not to fight at the Battle of Little Bighorn. Delivered in a cartoonish southern drawl, it was filled with corny sound effects and exaggerated comedy. At the time, some listeners chuckled at its silliness, but many critics felt it was tasteless, trivializing history and reducing it to slapstick. Despite the backlash, Mr. Custer reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, proof that novelty records could still dominate the airwaves.
Please, Mr. Custer, I don't wanna go.
Yet its reputation quickly soured, and it's now often listed among the most regrettable chart toppers of the decade. Number 7. Ringo by Lorne Greene, 1964.
He lay face down on the desert sand, clutching a 6-gun in his hand.
Before Beatlemania swept the world, there was another Ringo topping the charts, but this one had nothing to do with rock and roll. In 1964, Canadian actor Lorne Greene, star of the TV Western Bonanza, recorded a spoken word ballad simply titled Ringo. The track told the story of a gunslinger named Ringo, delivered in Greene's deep baritone voice with a dramatic orchestra behind him. Listeners expecting a tribute to Ringo's star were confused, while critics found the song overly serious, even unintentionally funny. Spoken word records already had limited appeal, and paired with the name Ringo, the song felt out of step with the youthful energy dominating the mid-60s. And yet, against the odds, it climbed all the way to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100.
No human being could match the draw of Ringo.
Today, Ringo is remembered less as a musical achievement and more as a puzzling novelty, proof that television fame could sometimes outshine musical credibility. Number 6. The Stripper by David Rose, 1962. Sometimes a hit song isn't really a song at all. It's a punchline. The Stripper, an instrumental by composer David Rose, became one of the most recognizable tunes of the early 60s, but also one of the most disliked. Originally recorded as a filler track, it was released almost by accident on the B-side of a single. Radio DJs discovered its playful, brassy arrangement, all trombone slides and burlesque rhythms, and started spinning it. Audiences quickly associated it with striptease routines, and before long it became a cheeky anthem for risque comedy sketches and parodies. While it hit number 1 in 1962, many listeners grew tired of its heavy-handed joke. Critics dismissed it as novelty fluff, more of a gag than real music. Even so, its campy swagger has endured in movies, TV, and commercials. A tune people groan at, but instantly recognize within seconds. Number 5. Downtown by Mrs. Miller, 1966. Few records of the 1960s inspire as many winces as Mrs. Miller's version of Downtown. At 58 years old, Elva Ruby Miller was not your typical pop star, a Los Angeles housewife with no formal training. She was discovered singing off-key hymns for church socials, and Capitol Records saw novelty gold.
When you're alone and life is making you lonely, you can always go
When she stepped into the studio to record Petula Clark's hit Downtown, the results were unforgettable. Mrs. Miller sang in a shaky, wavering soprano, often missing notes entirely. She was backed by a polished professional orchestra, which only made her performance sound stranger. Critics called it one of the worst covers ever made, but curiously, the public was fascinated. Her album, Mrs. Miller's Greatest Hits, even cracked the Billboard charts.
Downtown, you've got worries and all the noise and the hurry seem to help, I know.
For some, it was comedy. For others, cruelty. But Mrs. Miller's Downtown endures as a bizarre reminder that in the 60s, even joyful accidents could make it onto the airwave. Number 4, Who Are Parents? By the Shags, 1969.
Some kids do as they please, they don't know what life really is.
Some songs are disliked for being too polished, too sweet, or too silly. The Shags managed something entirely different. Music so raw and awkward that it sounded like nothing else. Their 1969 track, Who Are Parents, has been called one of the strangest recordings of the decade.
Our parents are the ones who really care.
The Shags were 3 sisters from New Hampshire, whose father insisted they form a band after a palm reader told him his daughters were destined for stardom. With little training and no sense of rhythm, they recorded Philosophy of the World, a cult classic for all the wrong reasons. Who Are Parents stumbles along with clashing guitar lines, offbeat drumming, and lyrics delivered in a flat monotone. It's moral that parents always know best, only added to the oddness.
Some kids think their parents are cruel.
Though panned at the time, the song later gained a cult following. To many, it's still painful. To others, it's outsider art at its most unfiltered. Number 3, They're Coming to Take Me Away, Haha, by Napoleon 14, 1966. Even in the anything-goes world of the 60s, some songs push novelty a little too far. Case in point, Napoleon 14's bizarre track with the backwards title, better known as They're Coming to Take Me Away, Haha. Recorded by Jerry Samuels under the stage name Napoleon 14, the song was built entirely around a manic spoken rant, complete with pounding drum beats and sound effects. The lyrics tell the story of a man losing his sanity after being abandoned, at first assumed to be by his lover, but later revealed to be his dog. Radio listeners weren't sure whether to laugh or cringe. At first, the song shot up the charts, peaking at number 3 in 1966, but backlash was swift, with critics calling it tasteless and mocking mental illness. Many stations banned it outright. Today, it's remembered as one of the strangest, most polarizing novelty hits ever to make the top 10. Number 2, Paralyzed by the legendary Stardust Cowboy, 1968. Some songs are so chaotic that listeners can't decide if they're hearing genius or pure nonsense. Paralyzed, recorded in 1968 by Norman Carl Odom, better known as the legendary Stardust Cowboy, is one of those... Armed with a trumpet, a drummer, and his own unrestrained voice, Odom created a track that sounded more like a wild outburst than a single. He howled, barked, and shouted through the verses, while the music stumbled around him in a blur of clashing sounds. The result was so unconventional that many dismissed it as unlistenable noise. And yet, Paralyzed managed to chart briefly on Billboard, largely because of its sheer shock value. Critics derided it, but over time, the record gained a cult following. Later inspired David Bowie, who borrowed part of Odom's stage name for his Ziggy Stardust persona. Love it or hate it, Paralyzed left a strange mark on rock history. Number 1, Surfin' Bird by the Trashmen, 1964.
Well, everybody's heard about the bird.
Sometimes a song is so ridiculous, it circles back around to brilliance, at least for some listeners. Surfin' Bird by the Trashmen is one of the most divisive rock singles of the night. Released in 1964, the track mashed together 2 earlier R&B tunes, Papa Mama and The Bird's the Word, stretching a simple chant into nearly 3 minutes of manic repetition. Lead singer Steve Warrer barked, growled, and squawked his way through the song, while the band pounded out a raw surf rock backing. Many critics blasted it as mindless nonsense, calling the lyrics childish and the delivery obnoxious. Yet teenagers loved its wild energy. The single climbed to number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100, proving that chaos could sell.
Don't you know about the bird when
Over the years, Surfin' Bird has swung between worst song ever lists and cult classic status, especially after turning up in movies, TV, and even modern internet memes. Bonus track, Yummy 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 by Ohio Express 1968. Bubblegum pop had its place in the 1960s, but few songs came to symbolize its shallowest side quite like Yummy Yummy Yummy. Released by the Ohio Express in 1968, the song was catchy, but also instantly mocked.
Yummy, 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 I got love in my tummy.
With lyrics repeating yummy, 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 I've got love in my tummy. Critics slammed it as childish nonsense. Even fans of bubblegum pop admitted it was more jingle than song, sounding like an ad for candy instead of a pop record. Yet teenagers bought in, sending it to number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100. For many, its success represented everything disposable about 60s pop: silly lyrics, manufactured bands, and music aimed more at cash registers than credibility.
Love you such a sweet thing, good enough to eat thing, and it's just what I'm gonna do.
Still, its goofy charm kept it alive in commercials and comedy skits for decades. Love it or loathe it, Yummy 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 is hard to forget once it's stuck in your head. And there you have it, 13 of the most hated songs of the 1960s. Some were massive hits, others were forgotten flops, but all of them earned a special place in music's Hall of Shame. Which one drove you the craziest? Or did we leave out a 60s clunker you think deserves the spotlight? Let us know in the comments. We're reading them all.